Central banks are incorporating climate change and ESG considerations across their operations, from bank supervision to financial stability and portfolio management. Increasingly, supervisors are requiring financial institutions to report their exposures to climate risk and fold it into their financial stability assessment. Today, our guest, Chuchi Fonacier, Deputy Governor for the Financial Supervision Sector of Bangko Sentral in the Pilipinas, has a lot to say about the evolving development of green finance markets, digitalisation efforts, green finance regulation, and capital markets reform. More importantly, why now is the right time for the Philippines' new regime and the opportunities that lay ahead. Welcome, Deputy Governor Fonacier.
Yeah, thank you, Brad, for that very generous introduction. Yeah.
As a starting point, I was just hoping you could help us set the scene by describing Bangko Sentral's initiatives towards developing green finance in the Philippines and how your approach differs from, your regional counterparts.
Yeah, actually, we really have a deliberate approach when it comes to the sustainable finance. We deliberately issued our sustainable finance framework in April 2020. That's because we wanted that as banks would try to reset their strategies given the COVID-19 pandemic, then this is something they would also consider. So as they are starting to reset strategies as well as adapt to new business models for those maybe trying to calibrate their business operations, then this is something that they can consider. So that's really a deliberate approach on the part of the BSP, that's the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, in issuing our sustainable finance framework.
But you are, as I understand, pursuing a slightly different approach. It's a phase-in approach to creating these, green finance. So I guess the first question, why not roll out all of the regulations all in one go? And more importantly, I guess, in targeting, so how are you measuring success in these initiatives?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Actually, there are several reasons why the BSP adopted a phased approach to issuance of our enabling regulations. First is we pursued the broader sustainable development concept, so we may be able to cover not only climate or green finance, but also the social and governance aspects. So the happening of the pandemic has indeed affirmed that we should not forget the social elements towards sustainable development. Second, we have observed of the differing stages of implementation and extent of awareness and sustainability principles among our supervised banks. So there are banks that are in advanced stages, which have established actually specific environmental and social risk management, developed their own sustainability framework, adhered to sustainability reporting standards, and offered sustainable finance instruments such as green, social, or sustainability bonds and loans for renewable energy and energy efficiency solutions. However, there are banks that are only beginning to understand the sustainability agenda. Hence, the issuance of the Sustainable Finance Framework in April 2020 signals the policy direction to our banks in terms of integrating sustainability principles in their governance framework, risk management, and strategy of the organization. And third, the topic of green finance and sustainable finance is still considered at the nascent stage. So practices are evolving and international standard setting bodies are just starting to recommend global standards. So we opted, therefore, to take small but sure steps towards the promotion of sustainable finance. So we also acknowledge the long-term strategic and operational adjustments that banks must undertake to embrace sustainability principles. Hence this phase-in approach, Brad.
So there's a lot to unpack there, but I just want to kind of touch on one thing. I mean, you've mentioned this, this is highlighting the policy direction, and these are, I guess, small but big steps. But it is it's more than just policy direction. As I understand, the central bank is collaborating with banking industry stakeholders in capacity building activities to help banks better manage their environmental or social risks. From your perspective, what are some of the data and technology challenges that you've encountered as you try to develop green finance markets? And what initiatives are underway in the Philippines to address some of these issues?
Yeah, actually, there are really data gathering challenges, and even in how we will organize the data. So right now, we would, of course, source our data currently from the reports of the banks. And that's why we need to consider how to really structure the reporting requirement, although we already have our initial, of course, idea how to go about it. But the challenge is really in trying to organize, as I mentioned, the data that we would be able to gather, and at the same time, commonality as far as, hence the taxonomy principles is very important. And in that, we have this, what we call as our interagency collaboration. We have this Green Force, we call, so it's currently chaired by both BSP and the Department of Finance. So we have this collaboration, and it's really is a whole of government approach that we're taking, so that we can have proper coordination, as well as I mentioned, really important element is on the taxonomy. So the challenge is in the data gathering, but at the same time as well in trying to organize our data, and how will that feed into our approach when it comes to rolling out already our initiatives.
So I wanted to deep dive a little bit more onto the taxonomy, right? So it is a principles-based taxonomy focused on facilitating flow of funds towards green and sustainable projects, as I understand. How is the work progressing?
What we're currently, we've already actually finalized the taxonomy, so meaning the green principles. But moving forward, we would, of course, definitely have this implemented. And so there are sub-teams or subgroups created to handle a specific set of, let's say, the approach that we're taking. So whether it is about the green finance ecosystem, so we will really try to have this properly group, and then there's a champion, a particular agency to champion that particular pillar, so that we would ensure that there's a mechanism as well of monitoring, at the same time a review of whether we're making a dent, let's say, for a particular segment of that entire green finance ecosystem, for instance.
Okay, so it sounds like the overall framework is there. Now, as they say, the devil's in the detail. It's about those subgroups really creating the underlying mechanisms.
Right.
I mean, you touched on Green Force, right? So which is that kind of intergovernmental collaboration. But what about other external collaborations? As I understand, you're working with the WWF in the Philippines to develop analytical tools and other frameworks on assessing the impact of client-related risks on bank portfolios, loan portfolios, I should say. I mean, is there anything else you can share about this other work that's underway?
Yeah, Brad. Actually, we're collaborating, of course, with the Worldwide Fund, Philippines, and also the industry associations here in the Philippines, like the Bankers Association. So we are collaborating with industry associations and other like-minded, of course, organizations. So in the case of WWF and the BAP, that's the Bankers Association of the Philippines, we initially sort of allowed volunteer banks to participate in our vulnerability assessment and stress testing exercises, and that the results of this will feed into our initiatives to now refine, let's say, the reporting standards when it comes to green finance, or the sustainability finance that we are of course embarking on a wider scale later on. So our collaboration with this and the volunteer banks, this kind of stress testing exercises, as well as the vulnerability assessment, as I mentioned, the results will really be beneficial, not just for the BSP, but of course for the entire industry, since that will inform the regulator and even, of course, the industry players. Moving along, how do we intend to devise not just reporting requirements, but even as well their plans on how to extend loans, of course, with sustainability principles in mind.
Interesting. I just wanted to deep dive a little bit more on this Bangko Sentral's own digitalization efforts. You know, the intersection with your approach and other green finance regulations. I mean, from your perspective, what have been some of the lessons learned in these initial phases?
Yeah, actually, on our part, the BSP is really cognizant that digitalization offers unique opportunities towards strategically addressing the challenges posed by climate change and other environmental and social risks. So in particular, certain solutions to global emission may become part of the new normal scenario. So these include, among others, the shift to digital or cashless transactions, which is seen to improve, of course, the country's environmental footprint. And then the sudden onset of the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the use of digital payments as community quarantine measures were observed and social distancing rules become the norm under the new economy environment. So relatedly, the BSP launched in October 2020, that's last year, our 3-year digital payments transformation roadmap, which aims to promote the broader use of digital payments and that supports our financial inclusion agenda. So targeted outcomes of this roadmap include shifting at least 50% of the total volume of retail payments into digital form. And the other one is having at least 70% of Filipino adults onboarded to the financial system through the ownership and use of a transaction account. And all of this should be achieved by the year 2023. So under the roadmap, significant initiatives are underway to realize this twofold objective. So this include the payments, digitalization, as I mentioned, initiatives such as the adoption of our national QR code standard or the QRPH, and also deepening, of course, the use cases with the launch of the QRPH person to merchant rail. And then we have this also our digital banking framework, and we have also this open finance framework, just among others of the initiatives of the BSP to support this our digital payments transformation roadmap. So to achieve the roadmap outcomes, the BSP calls on the support of the financial services and the banking sector. And in this regard, banks are urged to leverage on digital technologies to not only improve their operational efficiency and to accelerate innovation, but also, of course, to drive sustainable outcomes. So this digital transformation roadmap also complements the sustainable central banking program of the BSP. So we have that kind of program as well internally as an institution, where we commit to promote sustainable growth by fostering environmentally responsible and sustainable policies and work practices. So the program also embodies the BSP's role as an enabler, mobilizer, and doer in advancing the sustainability agenda. So if I may elaborate a bit, as an enabler, we provide a conducive environment through the issuance of our enabling regulations on sustainable finance. And then this is linked to our role as a doer, meaning the institution as a doer, because our expectations on the banks is to embed sustainability principles in their operations, which is the same track the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas is pursuing. So we have already actually implemented some initiatives that observe environmental preservation and protection practices.
So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but it sounds like one, very ambitious goals with a very short timeline. It sounds like also COVID has definitely helped push the inevitable in a much shorter time frame. But, you know, it's interesting how you've broken down the role of the enabler and as of the doer for the bank as well, that it takes, you know, multiple roles within this journey with its different kind of banks within the ecosystem, but also its own role across the broader economy. I guess I'm keen to understand, you know, regional perspectives for the Bangko Sentral, its ambitions for regionally for green finance, and how much is the central bank working with its regional peers?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Brad. Yeah, the BSP is actively participating in regional and global conversations on sustainable finance. So the insights and best practices on sustainable finance obtained through the regional fora and global discussions provide guidance and reference in our own initiatives towards the promotion of sustainable finance. So the BSP participates in the ongoing works of the ASEAN in promoting sustainable finance, such as membership in the ASEAN Senior Level Committee Task Force on Sustainable Finance. And then we also have this membership in the working group one of the ASEAN Taxonomy Board. And the BSB was also a member of the ASEAN Task Force on the roles of ASEAN central banks in managing climate and environment-related risks. So the task force conducted a study on the roles of central banks in addressing climate and environment-related risks to monetary, financial, and the broader macroeconomic stability. So the BSP is also, of course, an active member of the executives meeting of East Asia Pacific Central Banks, working group on banking supervision, or that's the EMEAP, EMEAP, WGBS. So it's a working group on banking supervision where sustainable finance is one of the pressing topics actually covered in the sharing of experiences among supervisors. And by the way, currently I chair this particular working group, the working group in banking supervision of this particular meeting. So, and we are also a member of the Network for Greening the Financial System, the NGFS, and the Sustainable Banking and Finance Network of the IFC. Just recently, the BSP joined actually the NGFS in conveying its statement of contribution to achieving global climate goals under the Paris Climate Agreement in light of the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of Parties, or the COP26 summit in Glasgow, Scotland. So those are just some of the collaborations that we have in the region when it comes to green finance.
Well, I mean, that's a lot. I mean, beyond, the short timelines domestically, there's a lot of collaboration I can see to keep you very, very busy and hectic over the
Right,
next couple of
Brad.
years. I mean, you did
Right.
mention, macroeconomic impacts, and I just wanted to maybe better understand from your perspectives on the impacts of the new framework on foreign and domestic capital flows.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, with the country working to meet our national determined contributions, or the NDCs, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, a transition to a low carbon economy would imply significant structural changes to the economy. So including a major reallocation of investment and capital flows. So in meeting the country's NDCs, foreign and domestic capital may be used to finance eligible projects that could assist in achieving climate mitigation goals of reducing carbon emissions, particularly in agriculture, waste, industry, transport, and energy sectors. So multilateral development institutions may also provide the necessary funding support through risk-sharing facilities to accelerate mainstreaming of green or sustainable finance. So on the part of the BSP and the other financial sector regulators, we will continue to provide an enabling environment to mainstream the sustainable finance or assured funds to green or sustainable investments. So the Interagency Technical Working Group on Sustainable Finance, the one I mentioned about, or the Green Force, we call it the Green Force, has already, as I mentioned a while ago, released the Sustainable Finance Guiding Principles, which we refer to as the principles-based taxonomy. So this will provide the rails by which we can identify economic activities that contribute to sustainable development, including those, of course, addressing climate change. So it likewise opens doors for funds to flow to these activities so that promote progressive transition to smoothly bridge the country's path to a resilient and low carbon economy. So actually in 2018 and 2019, the Philippine Securities and Exchange Commission released already the guidelines on the issuance of green, sustainability, and social bonds that are aligned with the ASEAN standards and also with the International Capital Market Association or the ICMA principles. And parallel to this, the BSB has pursued it's a sequence policy reforms by strengthening the corporate and risk governance standards on treasury operations, enhancing valuation rules for securities, and also streamlining bond approval process. Of course, subject to compliance with the set criteria that was provided. And all of these policy initiatives have enabled Philippine banks to issue already the green, social, or sustainability bonds.
So I like that reference of the bridge. It sounds like not only will there be a redirection of domestic capital, but you do anticipate a big role for foreign capital within the new framework.
Right, Brad. Exactly. Right. Yeah.
So, okay. So we've highlighted, obviously, there's lots of things you're working on domestically. There are short timelines. There are fairly grand kind of expectations of what you're going to be achieving. Likewise, it sounds like you're very integrated with your regional peers in terms of the programs. So let's look to the future, into our crystal ball. What's next for the central bank? And if we were having this conversation, I guess, again, let's say in 5 years, what would have changed?
Oh, yeah. So actually, the same question, of course, in our minds as well. So what are the next steps? That's exactly the question. So as a financial supervisor, we are set to issue further guidelines. We've so far issued, of course, as I mentioned, the Sustainable Finance Framework and the Environmental and Social Risk Management Framework. So the BSP will still issue specific guidelines covering the integration of sustainability principles in the investment management activity of the banks. We've so far issued the one on embedding the sustainability principles as far as the credit and the operational aspect of management, of risk management of the banks. So the next would be as far as the management activity of the banks. So as well as we would, of course, issue guidelines in the conduct of the climate stress testing by the banks and potential regulatory incentives as well. So we will also review how we can improve, as I mentioned a while ago, prudential reports to capture the climate, environmental and social risk data that can be used actually to feed into our policy development and even on our surveillance analysis. And moreover, the BSP will collaborate with other financial sector regulators to harmonize policies and align the initiatives with the objectives and the strategies of the Philippine Sustainable Finance Roadmap and guiding principles, which is actually, or which are actually the outcome of the collaboration of the Green Force. Mm-hmm. So these next steps are all under the umbrella of the BSP's role as an enabler. So that's the enabler part of our role as a central bank. And earlier I also mentioned about the Sustainable Central Banking Program, which embodies the essential roles of the BSP as an enabler, mobilizer, and doer. Now, as a mobilizer, we have already actually invested a total of $550 million in green bond fund, specifically and such managed by the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements. And we will continue to look for opportunities to increase our green bond holdings as we advance, of course, the sustainability agenda. And as a doer, then the BSP will continue to promote practices that contribute to environmental preservation and protection, carbon reduction, among others. By itself, as an organization, we have our Sustainable Central Banking Program. And so assuming different roles, then we would definitely roll out more activities, more initiatives towards this space.
Wonderful. I mean, I genuinely look forward to having this chat again, over the next 12 or 24 months to really see what's changed, because there is a lot on your plate of what to deal with, between being an enabler and a doer.
Right.
And with that, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you, Deputy Governor Fonacier, for joining us today and being so generous with your time.
Yes, you're most welcome, Brad, of course, and Manesh and the entire Regulation Asia. We thank, of course, you all for this opportunity as well to elaborate on our sustainability agenda.